Good morning or good afternoon. Today we'll be recording a video on Quizzette 805. As always, make sure you write your last name, comma, first name, today's date, and your class color. Today I'll say that I'm red. Number 1 is going to have similar questions as number 1 did last week. You're going to have a square or the sides of a square, which are 16 by 16. You're going to find what that multiple is, and then you're going to put that multiple inside of the square root sign and tell me what the square root is of that multiple, which should just be a single number. You can also use your square and square root table for number 1 each day. I want you guys to get used to these multiples or these numbers. So 16 times 16 is 256. And the square root of 256 is 16 times 16. When there's a pair inside of a square root, it's like you have a pair inside, so you just take one out. So remember, the opposite of a square of a number is the square root. So your answer is 16. The square root of 256 is 16. You do not have to write that 2 that I wrote there. That might confuse some of you, so you could take that out. Now 17 times 17, according to my chart, is 289. The square root of 289 is 17. I guess I can write it the same way. The square root of 17 times 17. So then the square root of 289 is 17. Make sure you only do Mondays. I don't want you to move on to Tuesday just yet. Number 2 is going to be different for you. I'm going to give you the definitions in a way of all the numbers that are in the real number system, and then you're going to answer number 2 accordingly. Number 2 is a screenshot or screenshots from the quiz that you guys are going to see hopefully next week. I know I said we were supposed to do it, I think, last week, but I honestly didn't feel comfortable with giving it to you guys. I felt like we were not ready yet, and I would rather wait to take the quiz so that all of us do better on it. So let me explain what this is. So we have the real number system. In the real number system, we have the irrational numbers, which I taught you were the square root of go ahead and write this down, perfect squares. So examples of that are like the square root of 2, the square root of 3. The square root of 4 is considered a perfect square, so that would be considered a rational number. The square root of 4 is 2, so that could be a rational number, an integer, a whole number, and a natural number. But irrational numbers, again, are square roots of non-perfect squares. So the next non-perfect square would be 5, square root of 6. Those are all irrational. Another irrational number is this little symbol right here that you might have learned last year, which is pi. And we usually round pi to be 3.14. But I want you to know that pi goes on forever. It's considered a transcendental number, which you don't need to know until you get to calculus. And even then, you don't even need to profess that. So pi, we always ended at 3.14, but know that there's an infinite amount of digits after pi. Rational numbers are numbers that can be turned into fractions. So a fraction could be 1/2, negative 3/4. Those are all rational numbers. Didn't mean to cross it out there. And then, let's see, integers are just positive and negative numbers. Whole numbers, think of whole pizzas. And then natural numbers, think of your fingers. Please excuse that sound in the background. It's kind of funny. This happened, I think, 2 weeks ago, and the ambulance came around the same time during 5th period, and it came out in the video. So funny. Okay. So now with this information, you could answer Tuesday number 2, and I'm going to let you go ahead and answer number 2 to yourself right now. And I'll give you about 2 minutes to do this on your own. So now that you've had a few minutes to yourself on number 2, I'm going to see if A, B, C, or D fit into that category that it gives you. So real numbers, as I said, real numbers are any numbers that include rational and irrational numbers. So irrational and rational numbers, which you see in there. Now, rational numbers include, if you look up here, they include integers. it includes whole numbers, and it includes natural numbers. Natural numbers. So A could be true. B is false. C is true because it's right here. And then repeating decimals, that's a fancy way of saying rational numbers. So how could that be in here? That's actually in here. So this is false. So it's true, false, true, false. Moving on to number 3. Number 3 says estimate the square root of 252 decimal places. So I went over this with period 5, and then I realized that 2 decimal places was just not nice and not pretty. So go ahead and cross out the word 2 and just put 1 decimal place and cross out the S right there. So in other words, to the tenths. So you're going to have 0 point or a number point something. So number 3 on Tuesday, make sure you write estimate the square root of 27, 1 decimal place. And then please excuse my 6th period class to the first page. It says estimate, I'm on Monday number 3. Estimate the square root of 250, 1/10 to 1/10 decimal. So if you look at that chart I gave you last week, if you don't have one, I'll give you one this week. It's called square and square root table. If I look at the square root table, 250 is between 225 and 256. So I'm going to write 225 is less than the square root of 250, which is less than the square root of 256. The square root of 256 is 16, and the square root of 225 is 15. So you know that my decimal is going to be 15 point something. So I have to find what that something is. Now, if I'm observing closely, the square root of 250 is only 6 units away from 256. So I already know that this 15 point something is going to be 15.5 to 16.0. So if I'm going to guess, I'm going to guess 15.6 or 15.7. So let's multiply those out and see which one is closest to 250. So I'm going to pause it so that I can solve it. You try to solve it as well. So I guessed too little because 15.6 times 15.6 ends up being 243.36. And that is quite a bit away from 250. 15.7 times 15.7 is also too small. It's 246.49. That's too small. So I'm going to try 15.8 times 15.8. Go ahead and do that on your own, and let's see what you get. So if you'd have done it correctly, you would have gotten 249.64, which I think is as close as we can get to the square root of 250. So your answer would be the square root of 250 is approximately, remember that squiggly line, the squiggly equal sign, is 15.8. 15.8. I apologize for the sloppiness. Hopefully yours is neater than mine. If you have questions, raise your hand, and good luck on this week's Quizzette. I also want you to edit number 3 on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to say 1 decimal place, 1 decimal place, 1 decimal place. Okay, now when you go